Hey everybody, here we are with Chapter 6, A Disastrous Dance. Hannah, when did you last see Togo? Nancy asked the housekeeper. Oh, about an hour ago. He barked to go outside and I let him. Nancy hurried into the house to call the River Heights dog pound. The warden there frequently cruised around the streets in a small caged truck and picked up any stray dogs. Something might have lured Togo into the street, and perhaps the dog warden took him away, Nancy said to herself. But after she gave a full description of the little terrier, the warden informed her that the pet was not at the pound. Nancy began to worry more than ever. With a heavy heart, she came outside again and told Hannah what she had learned. I'm going to ask our neighbors if any of them saw Togo, she said. Oh, I do hope you find him. Togo is such a dear and lots of company. Nancy went from house to house, but one person after another gave her a negative reply. Finally, however, she got a clue from a little boy who was riding a tricycle. Sure, I saw your dog, the lad said. He went away in a car. A car? Nancy asked. Whose car? I don't know, the boy answered. It stopped in front of your home just before I rode past. A man got out and called to Togo. He was on your front lawn. The man had a bone, and your dog came to get it. Then the man picked him up and took him away in the car. Nancy was stunned. A dog napper. She asked the child what the man looked like, but he had not noticed his face. Don't you know who he was? The boy asked. No, I don't, Nancy answered. But whoever he is, he's a mean person. Did he steal Togo? The little boy asked excitedly. I'm afraid so, Nancy replied sadly. Well, thank you for the information, Tommy. When she reached home, she said to Hannah, I have a terrible feeling that one of the double scorps took Togo. Perhaps he hoped by doing this to keep us from going on the trip, or at least delay us. During the afternoon, Nancy made further inquiries and reported the incident to Captain McGinnis. But evening came and there was still no clue to the whereabouts of her stolen pet. For the second night, Nancy Drew slept but little. She and Togo were fast friends, and the thought of perhaps losing him forever made her very unhappy. Then suddenly she sat up in bed. Had she heard a whine and a short bark, or had she imagined them both? No, I'm not dreaming, Nancy said to herself, as she detected the sound again. Grabbing up a robe and slippers, she quickly put them on and leaped down the front stairway, 2 steps at a time. Then she raced to the kitchen door and opened it. Togo dashed in, and she swept him up in her arms. Oh, you blessed little thing, you're back, Nancy cried, hugging her pet. How I wish you could talk and tell me who took you. But never mind, you're home now, and no dog napper will ever get you again. She noticed that both the terrier's license and collar were missing. She gave her pet an extra squeeze. You broke loose and got away from that dreadful man, didn't you? She asked. Togo yipped and licked her face. She set him down, and he ran over to his 2 special dishes in a corner of the kitchen. Thirstily, Togo lapped water from one, as Nancy filled the other with dog food. When he finished eating, Nancy picked him up and took him to her room. I'm going to watch over you personally, she told Togo. He snuggled down in a boudoir chair. Nancy got into bed and instantly fell asleep. She was up early the following morning, and when she came downstairs with Togo, both her father and Hannah Gruen looked at her and the dog in amazement. Nancy related what had happened. Neither Mr. Drew nor the housekeeper had heard Togo the night before. As soon as Nancy finished eating breakfast and had helped Hannah with the dishes, she drove off with her pet to the boarding home for dogs. On the drive back, she passed the home of Mr. and Mrs. Sakamaki. She decided to stop and tell them that she was leaving the next day for Hawaii. As she walked toward the front door, she heard strains of a guitar coming from the sunroom at the side of the house. Glancing through the window, she saw Mr. Sakamaki strumming a large guitar. He was wearing a gay flowered shirt, and an orchid lei hung around his neck. His wife, dressed in an embroidered, long, loose-fitting gown, which Nancy recognized as a Hawaiian muumuu, was going through the graceful motions of a hula dance. Nancy hesitated. Should she call just now or come back later? As she was debating whether or not to ring the bell, the door suddenly opened. Mrs. Sakamaki stood there and at once invited Nancy inside, saying she had seen her from the window. But I don't want to intrude if you are busy, Nancy said quickly. We are only having our morning exercise, Mrs. Sakamaki replied. Perhaps, she added, as her husband came forward, you would like to join us, even learn to dance the hula. Mr. Sakamaki heartily approved his wife's suggestion. He said he thought Nancy would enjoy knowing the Hawaiian dance. I'd love to learn the hula, Nancy answered. I hope I shan't appear awkward. You are very graceful, Nancy. You will learn easily, Mrs. Sakamaki assured her. But before we start the lesson, said her husband, perhaps our guest has some news for me. Nancy replied that she and her friends were leaving for Hawaii the next day. Then she told him about the dog napping episode and her suspicion that the person who had taken Togo was trying to prevent her from going on the trip. It does seem to prove that he wants to keep you away from Kalakula, Mrs. Sakamaki agreed. But you must be very careful while you are there. Mrs. Sakamaki now led the way into the sunroom, where her husband picked up the guitar. As Nancy waited for the hula lesson to begin, she glanced around. The small room was decorated almost completely with Chinese articles. In the center of the room stood a low tea table on which there were an exquisite set of china cups, saucers, and a teapot. Nearby, on a teakwood stand, was a fine handmade model of a large outrigger canoe with a tapa canopy. When Mr. Sakamaki noticed Nancy looking at it, he said, "That piece is very old, an antique." "It is very lovely," Nancy remarked, thinking that she must be careful during the dancing lesson not to bump into any of the art pieces in the room. "Shall we start?" Mrs. Sakamaki asked. Her husband began to play a lovely Hawaiian melody. Nancy watched Mrs. Sakamaki's feet carefully and soon was imitating the side-to-side step. Next came the swaying of the body, and finally Mrs. Sakamaki demonstrated the graceful raising and lowering of the arms and head. "With our hands and fingers we express certain ideas," Mrs. Sakamaki explained to her pupil. "For instance, move your hands forward together as if extending a gift, but do it with a slight rolling motion." The lesson went on for some time. Both Mr. and Mrs. Sakamaki praised Nancy's progress highly. They said that with a little practice and a proper costume, she would easily join a Hawaiian group. Nancy felt pleased. In her enthusiasm to indicate various ideas with her arms and hands, she forgot about the smallness of the room and its many art objects. Suddenly, one arm swept the antique outrigger canoe from its stand. Nancy made a wild dive to keep it from falling on the china teapot and cups. Although she managed to deflect the canoe so that it missed the dishes, she was unable to prevent it from crashing to the floor. "Oh, dear," she exclaimed, and bent to pick up the model. To her horror, it was rather badly damaged. The outrigger had broken off, as well as the uprights which held the tapa. "I'm dreadfully sorry." Mr. Sakamaki made light of the matter. Both he and his wife said they were glad Nancy herself was all right. The canoe could be mended. The couple persuaded Nancy to practice the hula for another half hour. By this time, she had begun to feel at ease in the swaying, relaxing rhythm of the Hawaiian dance. Before saying goodbye, she mentioned the damaged canoe once more, offering to pay for the repair work. "I shall probably repair it myself," Mr. Sakamaki said. "Please do not worry any more about it." Nancy heaved a sigh. Smiling, she said, "But because of it, I shall work all the harder to solve the mystery of Kalakula." She was about to leave the house when Mr. Sakamaki answered the ringing telephone. Upon learning who the caller was, he asked Nancy to wait. She wrote down a message, then hung up and turned to Nancy. "That was an answer to my telegram to friends, Mr. and Mrs. Armstrong in Honolulu. They will meet you at the airport and drive you to Kalakula." That was most kind of you," said Nancy. The Hawaiian gave a broad smile. "Mrs. Sakamaki and I thought you should know people in Honolulu on whom you could call in case of trouble. The Armstrongs are our closest friends." "You think of everything," Nancy said gratefully. "It will be so nice having the Armstrongs meet us." After saying goodbye again, she drove directly home. As she pulled into the driveway, Nancy was surprised to see the Drews housekeeper standing there waiting for her. She looked very pale, and Nancy suspected that something had happened. "Oh, Hannah, you have bad news?" she asked. I'm afraid so, the housekeeper replied. Oh well, chapter 6 leaves us with another cliffhanger for next week when we read A Studio Accident. I'll see you all tomorrow, and we'll talk about our chapters that we've read, and we'll also do our show and tell. So don't forget to bring an item to share with your friends.